Hello and welcome to Maple Flavored Yoga. My name is Andy and this is Dr. Claw. If you haven't done so already, please click the subscribe button, leave a thumbs up or a comment below. I would love to hear from you. You can also see what other things I'm up to on my website, mapleflavoredyoga.com. In this video, I'm going to be going over some different modifications that you can use in two very common poses in an asana class. We're going to be going over child's pose or balasana and downward facing dog or Adho Mukha Svanasana. I do have some props that I'll be using today. I have a bolster, a blanket, and some blocks. If you are practicing in a studio setting, a lot of studios have these available for you. And if your studio doesn't, most are okay with bringing in your own props if it's something that you know will support your practice. If you're practicing from home and you don't have props, you can substitute all of these props as well with additional blankets or books maybe for the blocks, pillows. Get creative. It's really anything that can help support you to make the shapes that you're requiring. I'm sorry, Dr. Claw. I gotta move ya. So the first one that we'll be going over is child's pose. You may have been in a yoga class and the teacher tells the class that you're going to be moving into child's pose or balasana, and that it's a resting pose and it feels really good and it's easy and all of these things, but maybe in your mind you're thinking, who are you talking to? This is not easy for me. And that's okay because we all move our bodies very differently. We hold tension in different areas. So hopefully some of these tips can help you find some type of comfort in this pose. So to begin, a lot of the times the teacher will say big toes together, knees wide, and you can come forward with your arms and kind of sit back onto your heels. So there's a few things that might not feel great here. It might not feel good on your knees. Maybe having your knees bent this much does not feel nice. So you could use a bolster. You can have the bolster so that it's resting on your lower legs and then you can come forward. So it kind of just raises that where your seat is going and reduces the angle here. Another option is to bring the bolster out front and coming down onto the bolster. If this is still too low, you can grab some blocks and then the bolster, and maybe this feels better for you. So again, it's lifting your bottom off, putting pressure onto your feet or reducing that strain in the back of the knee. Also, if you have sensitive knees, you could put your blanket underneath your knees as well, just to add a little bit more cushion. I have very bony knees, so oftentimes if I'm practicing camel or something like that, I'll opt to have a blanket underneath of my knees. So maybe this is kind of where you're at. This might be a really nice option. Just make sure that you turn your head from each side so that you're not elongating and shortening the muscles in your neck. Just something to consider. So maybe do 3 breaths on one side, 3 breaths on the other, depending on how long you're in the pose. Another option can be bringing your feet a little bit wide and then sitting back on a block. This will be a bit more of a sturdy base underneath your hip bones and it takes all the pressure off of your feet, which is nice. And then maybe from here you can come forward. And again, if this is feeling too much into your chest, you can take your bolster and a block if you want it and bring it down like this. This can be a nice option again. Actually, I really like to sit like this even in meditation. Sometimes I'll put a blanket over top of the block so my sit bones have a little bit more cushion. This can be a really nice variation for, like I said, meditation or at the beginning of class. Yeah, so just give it a shot. See if you like it. For some people, having your feet flat on the floor like this does not feel good. And then sitting on your feet adds a lot of strain into the top of the foot and the ankle. So you can always tuck your toes. That's always an option. And then you can come down like this. Another option is to take your blanket. You can roll it up, depending on how much you need. And then you can rest your ankles on that. So again, it lessens that angle on the ankle and the top of the foot. And then you can come down, arms in front or down by your sides. And always, as before, you can take a bolster again to kind of just elevate the floor to meet you, the floor to meet you. So this can feel really good too. Or maybe it doesn't, because everyone feels things differently. So these are just some options that can be really, really nice. So really when you're using props, what you're trying to do is bring the floor up to meet you to suit your body's needs. So you're kind of modifying how the floor and the levels are meeting your body in the contact with the mat or the prop or what have you. Right, Dr. Claw? Right. Instead of using a blanket, you could also use the bolster underneath your feet, or underneath of your knees can be a nice option as well. Onto your shins. And then you can come forward. Maybe you could stack your hands or use a block underneath your forehead. As you can see with all of these variations, my body is staying in a similar shape as the traditional balasana. And this is something that you can play around with at home too, to see what feels best for you. Also, if you're someone who can do balasana in very different variations and it doesn't bother you, I still suggest that you try some of these variations with the props, because it does shift how your body is in the pose, and it can just be a really interesting and fun exploratory practice. And it gets you out of that rut too of, oh, I know what I'm doing. It's kind of like a detachment practice as well. Now we're going to be moving into some variations for Adho Mukha Svanasana, or downward facing dog. So traditionally, I use that term very loosely. I'll come from tabletop because that's a pretty common way to get into downward facing dog. So toes are tucked, hips come up and back. And they might like to step out a little bit. There are some folks who like to have their feet really close together. Having your legs a bit wider can be a really nice option as well. It just moves the body in a different way. I usually go for a hip width apart type. It just makes me feel sturdy. So when you're in downward facing dog, you can bend your knees as much as you need to. I know sometimes people are really trying to force their legs to be straight. Again, we never want to lock out the joints. So if your downward facing dog looks like this and you're feeling a lot of lengthening through the backs of the legs, you've got the pose. That's already, you're already there. So keeping your knees bent is always an option. Another thing is people are like, my heels don't touch the ground. And again, that is not really the goal. I know there's a lot of people who think that is what we're trying to achieve, but it's really not. We just want to kind of intend our heels towards the floor to try and lengthen that back line of the legs. A really nice option is, though, if you don't like having your heels kind of just hanging out above the ground, is taking your blanket and placing it at the back. You might need, depending on how wide your stance is, you might need to make the blanket wider. But we can try and put it so that our heels are on the blanket. It will depend. Maybe you want to use a bolster. Maybe the bolster is where you're at. And none of these are better or worse than others. Having your feet and your heels completely flat on the floor doesn't mean that you're doing it better. Especially if you're really forcing your body into a shape that it's not ready to be in, it can cause a lot of tension in the body, which can be counterproductive. Whereas if we kind of find that minimum edge and then we hang out there for a few breaths, maybe our body will be like, oh, okay, I can loosen up a little. This feels okay. And then you can actually start to find more length or whatever you're kind of looking to feel. I don't want to say looking to achieve, but looking to feel in that pose. Trying to find that lengthening in the body, finding that relaxation, you know, all that kind of good stuff. So maybe, excuse me, Dr. Claw, I know, maybe you want to put your feet on a bolster. That might feel really nice. And it, honestly, it does feel really nice, I gotta say. It feels really good. And then just having your heels, then I can kind of push into my heels a bit more, and there isn't that same kind of tension. Oh, that feels really good, actually. But again, your legs don't have to be super straight. They can definitely be bent. Another thing for downward facing dog for some folks, or, you know, there's lots of poses where we're right on our hands. Having our hands flat on the floor like this can feel not so great. So, I guess it depends on, again, how much you want here, but you could put the heel of your hand, have it a little bit elevated. And then that will reduce the angle of the wrist, so that can relieve some pressure. That feels good, actually. It feels really nice. If that's something that you're not really into, you can always come on to your forearms as well. So some people might call this dolphin pose. It does move the body in a little bit of a different way, but there are a lot of very similar muscles that are used, the lengthening of the back line of the legs, getting into the shoulders and the upper back. So this is a really good option for people who have maybe carpal tunnel, or maybe they have a wrist injury that they're trying to be very careful about. So coming onto your forearms for downward facing dog or plank to give those wrists a break can be a really, really great option. If you're someone who likes to have the rolled blanket under your ankles for balasana or in balasana, and then have the blanket underneath of your heels for downward facing dog, at the beginning of class I would take my blanket, or you could use a bolster as well. Again, try out all the things. Like, variety is the spice of life. Why just do one? Right? Give it a whirl. See what you like. I would probably have it just rolled up Hopefully it stays. Do it this way. It'll stay this way. At least I know. It is noon. Anyhow, so then you can come into your child's pose. And then if you come into downward facing dog after that, you've got it already set up. And that just feels so nice. Yeah. Give it a wiggle if you feel the need. I'm always a fan of wiggles, definitely. So I hope you found these variations helpful for you. Again, if you do try them or if there's any other ones that you do that I haven't suggested, please let me know. I love learning these things every time I'm in a class or with other teachers and they share these different ways of getting into poses or different variations. I love it because I like to try it out, see how it feels in my body, and I like to share that in class with my students as well. So I hope you enjoyed this and know that wherever this life takes you, that you are seen, you are loved, and you are divine. Take care. Right on, Yola.